Any sailors out there, stand up. There you go. These sailors out there. It's Navy Week all across the country and here in Salt Lake. I love the Navy, and I'm honored and excited to introduce our speaker today. His name is Rear Admiral Moises DelToro III. He grew up in South Bend, Indiana, enlisted in the Navy in 1980. Applied for and was accepted to the NROTC program at the University of Utah, where he received his degree in mechanical engineering and his commission in the Navy. He chose the submarines, some say the most difficult branch of the naval services in his career. His sea tours include command of the USS Rhode Island, a nuclear sub, of course. That was from the year 2005 to the year 2008. During that time, that ship or boat received numerous awards for their efficiency. He also served as a division officer aboard the USS Pittsburgh sub, engineering officer aboard the Maine, a nuclear sub, and executive officer aboard the USS Salt Lake City, a nuclear. During this time, he had experience of deploying in the Mediterranean, North Atlantic, and Western Pacific, as well as conducting several strategic deterrent patrols. He assumed command Undersea Warfare Center in July of 2015. That's a huge position. In this position, he's responsible for leading more than 5,000 scientists, engineers, technicians, and support personnel. Both civilian and active duty. Personal awards include the Legion of Merit twice, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Meritorious Service Medal 2 awards, and various other campaign awards. When not underwater, he resides in the Washington, D.C. area with his wife, Carol Lynn, 3 grown children. They're empty nesters now. So, we welcome you aboard the Salt Lake Rotary Club. We're glad to have you, and we wish to thank you for your service and your continuous service for our country. Please welcome Admiral DelToro.
Time share the computer with my notes. What's the tipping edge? Roy, thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we had the Navy folks stand up before, but I'd like all the veterans to stand up for me, if you could, please. mean, part of the fun that I have these couple of days is meeting folks. I was at overstock.com over today and Master Control and got to meet some veterans there as well. So it's a pleasure to be able to come to Salt Lake City. You know, I have been back. I mean, it has been 30 years since I graduated from the University of Utah. I've been back a couple of times since my wife has family here in Utah. So, but a great opportunity the past couple of days. Yesterday, in meeting with the president of the University of Utah, the governor's office, the mayor. The mayor had a proclamation at the Utah Fair for Navy Week this week, for Navy Week. And so I'm really here, right, as part of Navy Week to showcase what the Navy is about. Every year, the Navy takes the time to pick about 15 cities so that don't necessarily have a naval presence. And we get folks like me, flag officers, that get to go visit. And in a Navy Week, we get to bring sailors along with us that get to be able to, and again, tell the word, tell everybody that they talk about the Navy. So we have the Navy band from the Pac Northwest here with us this week. We have folks from the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit. If some of you had a chance to see the news yesterday, I think early in the morning, they were demonstrating some of their robotic tools, autonomous tools that they use in diffusing bombs, of course. And then one really cool group of guys we have were the sailors from the USS Constitution. Right, so as all of you know, maybe most of the sailors or Navy folks know, Constitution is our oldest commissioned warship. We're 220 years old. And those sailors that are here visiting Salt Lake City this week are actually dressed in the uniform that the sailors back in the 1800s wore. So it's going to be 92 degrees today. You need to feel a little bit sorry for those guys because that black coat is wool. And, it's going to be hot. But they're going to be all around. I mean, I think they're going to a football game at, what's the high school?
Hillcrest High School.
Hillcrest High School on Friday night. The leapfrogs, I think, are here Saturday for the Real Salt Lakes soccer game. Is that right?
Utah,
the
Utah game and the BYU game. They're jumping in the boat.
All right, so we got the leapfrogs jumping in, so a huge presence. So hopefully, I'd like to, I mean, I'm going to try to go through these slides as quick as I can, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. I do have to leave at about 1:30 because I'm going to go visit the president of BYU next, and so I'm grateful that Utah beat BYU this past weekend. So it has something to add about. Okay, so as I mentioned, the Navy kind of started over 200 years ago. Right, so we got a picture here of Constitution, which is really cool. Yesterday I spoke at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and had the opportunity to share with them this brief as well. And so one of the key nuggets that I think is really awesome, in July of this year, we commissioned the very newest aircraft carrier. So USS Ford was commissioned on July 22nd. And then on July 23rd, USS Constitution came out of a 2-year overhaul up in the shipyard in Boston, right? So in a span of 2 days, brand new ship and the oldest ship in the United States today, all were in the news. So pretty awesome thing. In 1974, Congress authorized the construction of 6 frigates, one of course, which is the legendary USS Constitution, with the acknowledgement that the attacks on our merchant vessels rendered it necessary that a naval force should be provided, right? So the Constitution specifically calls out for the need to provide and maintain the Navy. These frigates were the genesis of the Navy that we know today. So, and while everything else has changed during the past 2 centuries, ships, aircraft, people, even the world, the Navy's enduring mission has remained the same. Right? We protect America from attack and preserve American influence around the world. We prevent conflict and deter aggression, enabling peaceful resolution of crisis. And we are always ready to fight and defeat the enemy at any time. So preserving, let me just click through this so I don't get caught up. Preserving the Navy's strategic influence overseas is an important part of the Navy's mission. But America's Navy also plays a large part in preserving trade around the world. How does this matter to you? Well, the global economy continues to expand and become more connected. This network of oceans, seas, and waterways, what we call the classic maritime system, is becoming increasingly used by the United States around the world. More than 40 million US jobs, 26% are directly or indirectly tied to global trade. 20% of US manufacturing jobs depend on exports. 22% of all US agricultural products by volume are sold in overseas markets. And one statistic I looked up is there's $12 billion of Utah exports in 2015. Right? So even Utah has a good chunk of exports that are going overseas that require a Navy to protect our needs. The contribution of the America's Navy doesn't just benefit Americans, though. The oceans of the world have long served a path to new frontiers and new opportunities beyond national borders. As a nation with multiple maritime borders, the United States has always been a nation with global interests. Those interests have grown in number and diversity in the turn of the 20th century. Considering the following, more than 70% of the earth is covered by ocean, and more than 90% of the global commerce is conducted by sea. In this day and age, the security of maritime trade routes is vital to the global economy, not just for the United States, but for all seafaring nations. And despite a century's worth of changes around the world, one thing has not changed. In an increasingly globalized world, America's oceans are even more reliant on our Navy. America's Navy is ready to defend America, our allies and partners, and our strategic interests at all times. We are uniquely positioned to do so because the world's oceans provide us with access to America's interests anywhere around the clock, using naval power from the sea. The material foundation of our Navy, of course, is our ships, aircraft, and submarines. Instead of those original 6 frigates, the Navy now possesses a wide variety of surface vessels, from 97,000-ton aircraft carriers to fast, agile, littoral combat ships and coastal patrol vessels. You have a picture here of a DDG and Aegis-class cruiser. Right, so again, I think about a month ago, we just commissioned the newest of our Aegis-class cruisers, DDG 115. Named after the Marine Corps Medal of Honor winner, USS Rafael Peralta. Right? Undersea warfare has long been a specialty of America's Navy, and that tradition continues today. Our submarine force has evolved from the diesel-electric submarines of the old to nuclear-powered vessels armed with everything from torpedoes to Tomahawk missiles. Yet, the most reliable part of the submarine force, like the Virginia-class submarine here, the USS Illinois pictured here, is the ability to strike from the deep without warning. Right, so I don't know, I mean, it's in my bio, Roy talked about me being on Salt Lake City. So there was a Salt Lake City club at the time. I don't know if any of you here were part of the Salt Lake City club, but a lot of support for the submarine USS Salt Lake City. Later this evening, I meet with the commissioning committee of USS Utah, right? So a Virginia-class submarine. And can anyone guess her hull number? I didn't even know this until yesterday, so it's a little embarrassing. right? You can't answer, you heard me speak yesterday. Area code of Salt Lake City is 801, so SSN 801, right? So pretty clever for the Secretary of the Navy. I think it's the first time that's probably ever happened. Yeah. Area code is actually the whole number of the submarine. You'll never forget that, right? There should be no Utah on it. I forgot if is all Utah 801 or is it just? All right, so everyone up here in Salt Lake City should remember that we have a submarine named after. It's long been held that the first question an American leader also asks during times of crisis is, where is the nearest carrier? Such a question confirms the importance of naval aviation to America's Navy. And the most prominent component of naval aviation today is the FNA-18 Hornet, a multi-mission jet capable of carrying out ground attack missions and air-to-air combat, as well as mid-air refueling and electronic attack. The Hornet is just one example of the planes, helicopters, and yes, even unmanned aircraft that form the backbone of projected naval power. All of which allow us to do a greater number of things at sea without the need of another country's permission to operate within its borders. There are 275 ships in the United States Naval Battle Force today, 99 of which are based overseas, what we call forward deployed, in locations such as the Middle East, Europe, and Japan. Of the Navy's 400,000 active and reserve sailors, more than 70,000 are forward deployed to support our operations around the globe. And just one example of the kind of power America's Navy can show, this photo features a total of 11 ships, a typical carrier strike group, and an amphibious readiness group with approximately 10,000 sailors. A pretty awe-inspiring sight when you see something like that on the oceans. America's Navy reaches into every corner of the world. We have 6 major commands responsible for naval operations, ranging from our own shores to Europe and the Middle East, from Central and South America to Africa, and from one side of the Pacific Ocean to the other. As you can see, these commands carry out a wide variety of missions every day. And here are a few examples of what your Navy is doing right now. Right, the Navy provides regular support to 2 operations against Islamic State in the United States 5th Fleet and the 6th Fleet area of responsibilities. Current operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria include airstrikes from ships in the Middle East and the Mediterranean Sea. Maritime security operations are a major part of our operations around the world, including counter-terror operations in the Middle East and Africa, and counter-illicit trafficking operations in Central and South America. Humanitarian assistance, even more important today. Navy's ability to carry out rapid response humanitarian assistance operations was demonstrated last October after Hurricane Matthew struck Haiti and the Caribbean islands. Sailors and Marines from the USS Iwo Jima and USS Mesa Verde worked with the U.S. Agency of International Development to deliver supplies. I was reading in the news yesterday, there are 5 Navy ships supporting the current humanitarian assistance with the hurricanes that just passed the Caribbean and in southern Florida. A carrier, can't recall the name, is actually on its way to South Florida, Key West. If any of you have seen the photos like I did this morning, and the road going in to Key West is essentially gone, right? So those that were evacuated are probably not going back for a while. Those are there are stuck for some time now until we figure that out. So the Navy is playing a big role there. At some time, America's Navy is faced with more than its share of challenges. Some are material, some are financial. Needless to say, all of these challenges pose significant issues for our sailors and the leaders going forward. It is often said that we live in an increasingly complex world, and nowhere is this clearer from the world's oceans. The demand for America's naval forces is rising in areas such as the South China Sea, where territorial claims are under dispute, and the Black Sea, where we continue to support our NATO partners. America's Navy is also engaged in operations in the Middle East and the Mediterranean Sea, where we use our combat power against targets in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Libya. Another concern is the emergence of competitors and adversaries with increasingly sophisticated forces such as China and Russia, as well as countries like Iran and North Korea, who want to deter naval forces from operating near their territory. The advancement of these potential adversaries and competitors makes it more important for the Navy to advance its own forces as well. To do this, we need to modernize our existing ships, aircraft, and weapons to make them more capable. America's Navy has the flexibility to take on a wide variety of missions. Our military leaders have recognized this flexibility and now often call upon the Navy to take on an increasing range of operations around the world. Unfortunately, the higher operational demand has placed a significant strain on our fleet. Not only are we seeing accelerated wear and tear of our ships, submarines, and aircraft, but it's also imposed stress on sailors and their families. As a result, the Navy has had to forego necessary investments in our hardware and our sailors so that we can keep doing the job in an increasingly complex and fast-paced security environment. Yes, America's Navy faces challenges, and here's what we're doing every day to face those. So we're restoring and maintaining the Navy's operational and combat readiness in an immediate concern. Not only must we make immediate investments in the readiness of our afloat forces, but we must also accelerate and extend active ship and aircraft production lines, such as the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer and the F-18 Super Hornet, both of which provide relevant capabilities now and in the years ahead. America is investing in the next generation of naval and aviation technology, including the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. During the past year, we carried out testing of the F-35 aboard aircraft carriers and amphibious assault vessels, preparing them for their ultimate deployment throughout the fleet. Of course, America's Navy is nothing without the most important component, the American sailor. The men and women of your Navy serve in a wide variety of jobs throughout the fleet, manning and maintaining our ships, submarines, and aircraft carriers around the world. I had an opportunity last March to be the reviewing officer at a recruit graduation in Great Lakes, where we graduate, I think, on the order of hundreds of sailors every week. I think there's just 2 weeks a year that we don't graduate sailors from boot camp. So just seeing the excitement on these sailors is pretty awe-inspiring. So what about the future? What will the fleet look like years from now? Over the past year, there's been a lot of discussion about what the Navy will look like in the decades to come. 2 central themes have emerged. First, our Navy will need at least 350 ships to maintain our superiority at the seas. But numbers in itself are not enough. For those of you that have heard the Chief of Naval Operations talk, he says, I need more ships, but I don't have time to get to the number of ships. So if you look at 350 ships, it's going to take us some time to get there. So in addition to number, I need quality. So I need more capable platforms, aircraft, in order to meet the threat of the future. So hopefully the presentation that I've given to you there is giving you a little bit of a snapshot of what the Navy is, where the Navy is today, what the Navy is all about. And that's really all I have from a presentation standpoint. So I did go there, I went there kind of quick, so I've got some time, 5 or 6 minutes, I think, at least for some questions. I think.
I'm wondering, is the Navy doing anything in the Arctic with the climate changing and the Northwest Passage becoming possible? What are we doing there?
So yes, so actually Roy, oh, okay, so is the Navy doing anything in the Arctic with respect to climate change? So the Navy has an interest, as do other countries, in operating in the Arctic. The submarine force does an Arctic ice camp every other year, I think. So where we deploy a submarine under the ice. The Navy Arctic lab actually sets up an ice camp, and we actually do the experimentation, collect the data. I don't know that it's necessarily in support of climate change, but I'm assuming they share data with other folks that are concerned about the data about climate change. But really, we're looking at ensuring that we have the capability of operating in the Arctic if the need arises for us to do that. All right, Steve.
I'm sure the Navy has really sophisticated radar that protects these vessels as they're out. I don't recall ever hearing of a collision until these last two. And I just think, how does the alarm not go off, and who's on the bridge, and how does the Navy ship collide with the citizenship? It just baffles me. Do you have an answer for what happened?
So I do not have an answer for what happened. The CNO has directed that Admiral Davidson lead an investigation into the collision of the USS Fitzgerald and the John S. McCain. So that's ongoing. So it's going to probably take months, is my guess. But you're right. I mean, we look at, so the VCNO spoke in a congressional hearing last week, where it was similar in line with what you were talking about, right? So his expectation, his thinking is that the forward deployed forces, so like the two ships that are based out of Japan, and the operational tempo of those deployed ships is pretty high. So you would have expected, and the VCNO kind of thought they would have been the more ready of any of our naval ships. So he has had to do some thinking himself and rethink about what's really happening, right? So are we stressing those ships so much in the support they provide to the fleet commanders that they don't have the time to do the training, maintain proficiency? So there's an investigation going on, and I'm assuming that it will be made public like most investigations.
I mean, that's a rare occurrence.
It is a rare occurrence.
I've never heard of that happen.
Right? Especially in a matter of months, right?
Yeah.
Two destroyers in the Western Pacific in a matter of a couple of months.
Yeah, so I think we have about 10 or 11 carriers in the.
We have 10 carriers.
And so now that the Ford class is out, are they going to replace all of the Nimitz class, or is there something about the Ford class that will allow us to get by with fewer carriers?
So I think you'll find the requirement is for 11 carriers. We are building, so Ford has commissioned, help me out, Mac, John, the Kennedy.
John Kennedy and Enterprise have also been.
Kennedy and the Enterprise have been authorized, so we've actually started. I know they've laid the keel for the Kennedy. They've probably not laid the keel for Enterprise. They build carriers, I think, on 5-year cycles. So, so the plan, of course, I mean, as in most shipbuilding, we look at Virginia-class submarines, right? So the build rate of our Virginia-class submarine, the attack submarine, is designed to replace the older Los Angeles-class submarines. I'm assuming we'll do that in the future with aircraft carriers. We'll continue to authorize more and more carriers as the older carriers get, carrier has a lifespan of about 40,
50.
50 years. So carriers are around a long, long time, longer than most ships.
I'd like your comments on the Navy's anti-missile capability, the type of rockets that North Korea is firing, I saw them and others. Does the Navy have the capability to take those out?
So I'm a novice when it comes to the whole ballistic missile defense kind of problem. So I know we have ballistic missile defense. I mean, most of our forward deployed ships in Japan and in Rotary, Spain are there for the ballistic missile defense mission. I honestly couldn't tell you what the true capability is, like what missile it can and what missile it can't shoot down. I'm the wrong guy for that. Sorry.
We've heard for a long time about the piracy off the coast of Somalia and so on. What kind of role did the Navy play there, and how much of a difference did it make, and what's the situation now?
So, I would say it's pretty calm right now. I mean, we do have ships deployed in that area. I mean, the whole purpose was to kind of lessen the opportunity for the pirates to go off and kind of do stuff like that. I mean, we're not the only country. China's actually doing anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden. Russia's doing anti-piracy. So it's really an international kind of interest item for most countries because it's not good for business. But it's cyclic. I mean, I haven't heard much in the news lately, so I think we're actually doing a pretty good job. Yep.
Our Navy is forward deployed. How about that Navy of China and Russia specifically? How close do they come to the United States? 200 mile? Is that the limit? Do you see them outside our borders that often?
Outside our borders.
Our international.
So China has aspirations for a blue navy, right? So if you read anything that China is writing about, ultimately that's where they want to go. Their strategy up until a couple of years ago was kind of protecting the homeland, but they are building ships and they are building submarines at a rate faster than we are in the United States for the sole purpose of expanding their sphere of influence. So Russia is, a lot of folks have written about a resurgence of Russia. So after the Cold War, Russia deployed less frequently, but away from their kind of bastion up in the North Atlantic and the Northern Pacific. But you'll see in the news today that Russia is deploying and showing their forces more as well. So I don't see China deploying to the coasts of the United States yet. I mean, on occasion, I think Russian submarines probably still kind of do that kind of stuff, but we don't necessarily know everything that the Russian submarines do as well. Right? So that whole clandestine part of the capability that we protect, I'm sure the Russians do as well.
In that photograph of the carrier task force, there's another ship that was smaller and looked like it had aircraft on it. What was that?
Yeah, so when you had the carrier strike group and its complement of escorts, you also had an amphibious ready group. So that would have been, I don't know what specific ship it was, but it could have been a Bonhomme Richard, so an LHA. So it is a landing helicopter attack.
Yes, sir.
I'm not an amphibious guy either, so if you think the Navy guy would know all these acronyms, but you live as a submariner for 30 years, you got to know that part of the business. So they can launch, so the Joint Strike Fighters, there's going to be a vertical takeoff version of the Joint Strike Fighter. Going to be able to take off from that, and until then, the Harrier. So the Harrier is the current Marine Corps version of a vertical takeoff and landing jet, and helicopters, of course.
In your experience then with submarines, I'll let you talk your end. Where are they building submarines now? I remember years ago when the closures they were closing, I think, the electric boatyard or Newport News, I'm not sure.
So there are no plans whatsoever to close any of the shipyards. So right now, the Virginia class submarine is the only one that's in a hot production line, so producing submarines. There's a 50-50, maybe not 50-50, but there's a share agreement between General Dynamics Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut, and Huntington Ingalls Shipyard in Newport News, and they all build part of a submarine. So when you look at the USS Illinois, for example, in the one photo, that was not built by one shipyard. Part of it was built by an electric boat. Part of it was built by the folks at Newport News and Huntington Ingalls. So that was designed to support the industrial, so we could maintain the industrial base of having two submarine builders for that purpose. That's why we did it. It never used to have that strategy. We were building attack submarines. Electric Boat was building attack submarines, full submarines. Huntington Ingalls was building full submarines as well.
What does the submarine cost to build?
A current Virginia class submarine costs on the order of about $2 billion.
The Zumo was $4 billion, maybe?
So I don't know the cost of the Zoom. So I couldn't tell you whether you're close or not.
Time for one more question.
All right, got one more.
You know, we all are concerned about the conflict between North Korea and South Korea. So I'm sure all of the services have been alerted in some way to expect some kind of possible action. Does the North Koreans have a navy with submarines?
North Koreans have a lot of submarines. So they have a lot of small submarines, but they do have submarines. I was in Sasebo, Japan in 2000. And on display was one of the many submarines the South Koreans had captured that the North Koreans had used for their insertion of their equivalent of our special forces kind of guys. So they have a lot of those mini submarines that they use, and they're all diesel electric, so they're not nuclear powered. But yes, they do have a navy. The sinking of the South Korean ship, the USS Chosen, I think, the Choin or something like that, was actually from a North Korean submarine.
Were the dress blues still scratches, what
So one of the smartest things the Navy did, in my opinion, was go to Brooks Brothers and say, it costs a little bit more. So there's two variants of service dress blues. You got the regular Navy issue, and then you got the Brooks Brothers issue. I have a set of Brooks Brothers service dress blues, and they're absolutely